now. Okay. Aloha. Thank you guys all for tuning in to our Zoom pre-recorded presentation. Today, Thursday, April 23rd, we are co-hosting with Jennifer Urmston from the Hawaii Pacific University, and she'll be talking about Blinded by the Light, Wedge-tailed Shearwater, attraction to artificial light along the Kalanianaole Highway. So, Jennifer.
All right, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad that we're able to do this talk via Zoom today. So again, my name is Jen Urmston, and I'm a master's student at Hawaii Pacific University in the Masters of Marine Science program. And I work with Dr. David Heirenbach in the Pelagicos lab, studying wedge-tailed shearwaters and light pollution on Oahu. So today I'm going to be sharing part of my master's thesis research with you. So just a quick overview about how my talk is going to go today. First, I want to give you a background to the wedge-tailed shearwater, which is the species I study, just in case you're not familiar with them already. Next, I'll talk about my research, which is what I'll spend most of the time talking about, kind of give you a sense of what I've been working on for the past year or two. And then last, if you stick with me the whole time, the fun part is how you can get involved to help protect these birds. So wedge-tailed shearwaters, or Ardenna pacifica, are a native Hawaiian seabird. Their Hawaiian name is Uaukani, which means moaning petrel. And if you've ever heard them before, you know why they're called that, because they make a loud, moaning, kind of crying sound. It's actually quite spooky if you don't know what you're hearing. And another affectionate nickname for them is wedgies, which is always a great way to get the kids to laugh. But whatever you call them, shearwater, Uaukani, wedgie, it's all referring to this beautiful bird right here. And they're quite abundant on Oahu, and they are a species of least concern. Nonetheless, they're federally protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Wedge-tailed shearwaters primarily nest on offshore islands, but there are some colonies on the coast as well. So on Oahu, a couple onshore colonies are Kailua Beach and Kaena Point, and they nest on most of the offshore islands. But the largest colony is Manana Island, or Rabbit Island, this island pictured here. And there's upwards of 30,000 nesting pairs just on Manana Island alone. So they primarily will dig burrows in the sand to lay their eggs, but they're not super picky. Sometimes they'll nest in beach naupaka like this, or they'll find holes in the lava rock and lay their eggs in there. So shearwaters are seabirds, which means they spend a portion of their life flying out over the open ocean. So what does a year in the life of a shearwater look like? Well, around March is when the adults start coming back from sea and arriving at their breeding colonies. And then April and May is when they'll start finding their mates and building their burrows. June is typically when eggs are laid. And over here is a picture of a shearwater egg. It's about the same size and shape as a chicken egg. And then August is usually when the chicks hatch. And as you can see, they're super adorable, very cute and fluffy. But as they grow, they'll start to lose some of those downy feathers, and they'll start to resemble the adults more. So they'll fledge sometime between November and December. Usually the peak of fledging is somewhere around Thanksgiving time. And when they fledge, they look pretty much like the adults. They might still have some down, but the parents will leave shortly before the chicks fledge. So the parents are going to fly back out to sea until next March, and the chicks, this is their first journey out to sea. So chicks fledge during the night, and typically they use the light from the moon to orient themselves as they fly out to sea. So the best case scenario is they follow the moon, they fly out to sea, and they start their life as a seabird. But in some areas like Oahu that are highly urbanized, where there's a lot of light pollution, the birds can get confused and end up flying towards land instead of flying out towards sea. So the problem with that is that when they fly towards these bright sources of light, they become blinded and disoriented and end up stranding on the ground. Now, it's very difficult for them to get back into flight once they strand. These birds are designed to stay in the air for long periods of time so they can fly long distances over the ocean. But the caveat to that is that it's very difficult for them to get into flight initially. So since the birds are often attracted to streetlights, this often causes them to strand on or near the road. And this process of the birds being attracted towards light and stranding on ground is called fallout, and that's a term we'll be using heavily throughout the rest of the presentation. So once the birds are stranded on the road, they face several threats. One is that they can be run over by cars. Also, they can be eaten by scavengers, either before or after getting hit by cars. Scavengers such as cats, dogs, mongoose. Now, there are a couple environmental parameters that drive how likely fallout is to occur on any given night. One thing is moonlight, which has been studied multiple times, and the same trend is seen here, that the closer we are to a full moon, the less likely birds are to end up being attracted towards artificial light. And this is likely because when the moon is big and bright in the sky, it's pretty easy for them to distinguish the difference, and it's easier for them to see which direction is the ocean and which direction is the land. Weather events such as storms can be drivers of fallout. For example, in 1992, there was an unusually high number of shearwater stranding on Oahu, and this was attributed in part to anomalous southeasterly winds from storms that year. Some more recent studies are looking into the effects of wind speed and wind direction and finding that stronger winds blowing toward shore are more likely to increase fallout. And this makes sense because if the winds are blowing birds towards land and towards the direction of artificial light, then they're more likely to end up stranding on the ground. All right, now I'm going to move into my research. So back in 2012, my advisor, David Heirenbach, began documenting road-killed shearwaters along the Kalanianaole Highway. And he did this by conducting systematic road surveys so that we could compare the number of birds we were finding across years. And these surveys have been going on every year since 2012 up until just last year, 2019. Now, halfway through the study period in 2016, Oahu switched most of the major highway streetlights from high-pressure sodium lights to light-emitting diode or LED lights. Now, the question is, did this change in highway lighting impact wedge-tailed shearwater fallout? So we'll be using 4 years of road surveys from before the change in lighting and comparing that to 4 years of surveys after the change in lighting. Now I want to go over a couple differences between the old and the new lights. The old lights were high pressure sodium bulbs and they emitted a yellow-orange light. These lights were not fully shielded, so there's some outward and upward light scatter. And they're also more of a narrow wavelength range with a single peak around 600 nanometers. The new lights are LED lights and they emit a white light. They're fully shielded, so the light is directed straight downward, and they're more of a broad spectrum light with two peaks around 450 and 600 nanometers. Now, light shielding has been an effective technique to reduce shearwater attraction, and this was seen in the Newell shearwaters on Kauai. However, a 2004 study that looked at wedge-tailed shearwater vision suggests that they might be more sensitive to shorter wavelengths of light, such as the blue light that's emitted by the LEDs. A 2017 study in Australia found increased shearwater attraction to LED lights over high-pressure sodiums, and this was with short-tailed shearwaters. However, the difference here wasn't statistically significant, so it's still somewhat unclear how all these different features of the lights are impacting seabird attraction. So my hypothesis is that wedge-tailed shearwater fallout would respond to the change in highway lighting, and I predicted that a sensitivity to the shorter wavelengths of light would outweigh the benefits of the shielding, thus leading to an increase in fallout under the new lighting conditions. Now, to really address this, I have to consider some of those environmental drivers of fallout. So my predictions here are consistent with what previous studies have found. I expect to see less fallout the closer we are to a new moon, so with more lunar disk illumination. I expect to see more fallout as the wind speeds get higher, and more fallout when the winds are blowing towards shore. So in this case, it would be winds blowing from the east to west. The moon data that I used came from the US Naval Observatory, and my wind data came from the Pacific Islands Ocean Observing System. Okay, so the study location is a 16-kilometer section of Kalanianaole Highway on East Oahu. And if you're not familiar with this region, this is an overhead picture of what this highway looks like. You can see it's very beautiful, but also a good portion of it goes directly adjacent to the ocean. So there's not much in between the breeding colonies, which are right over here, and the highway. So our survey route starts up here at the Olamana Golf Club, which is kind of where Kailua meets Waimanalo. And then we would drive all the way through Waimanalo. Oops, my pointer. We would drive all the way through Waimanalo, going past the two major breeding colonies, Manana Island and Ka'ohikaipu Island, around the bend here at Makapu'u, down past Hanama Bay, and I put this little fish here for Hanama since that's where we're supposed to be doing our talk today. And then our survey route ended at the Koko Marina Center, just as you get into Hawaii Kai, and then we would drive that same route all the way back. So to quantify annual fallout, we conducted 17 of these road surveys during the fledging season between November 3rd and December 21st. And again, we did this for 8 years between 2012 and 2019. So that's 4 years before the highway lights were changed and 4 years after. We drove this route at about 25 to 35 miles per hour, slow enough to visually search for birds. And we did this every 3 days at sunrise. So most of the time, we were just finding dead birds already. Every now and then we would find a live bird, in which case we would take it in for rehab and get it the help that it needed. But unfortunately, most of the birds we encountered were already killed. So when we found a bird, we pulled over the car, recorded the GPS coordinates of where it was found using a handheld GPS like this. And then we took multiple photos to document mortality. So we took an up-close photo of the bird, how we found it, and then we also took photos of the nearest street light, if it was close to one. So just to point out in this picture here, you'll notice there's a lot of electrical wires intersecting here. And this bird that I found here, I think this one may have actually died as a result of colliding with a power line. It had a broken wing, but there was no open wounds or anything. So that's another way that they can be injured. Okay, so after taking photos, we marked a random subset of the birds with a string and a metal tag, like you see here, and I'll explain why we did that. So one issue with conducting these surveys at 3-day intervals is that even though the birds are dead, that doesn't mean they necessarily stick around on the road forever. They can be removed by scavengers, humans can take them off the road, or if it's been really rainy and stormy, the birds can start to decompose to the point that we might not recognize them on our next survey. So that means that we could be underestimating. So to address this, we marked birds during the surveys and then went out daily and drove a portion of the survey route to revisit these birds that we marked and to see if they were still there or if they'd been removed. So we did this for up to 9 days, at which point, if the birds were still there, we would take them off the road. And that's what I'm doing here in this picture. Okay, so my results from this section are shown here, and I did a survival analysis to show the probability that a bird would remain on the road after so many given days of being marked. So down here on the bottom is showing time in days, with 0 being when the bird was first marked. So of course, there's 100% of the birds there, and then each day that goes by, birds are being removed. So you'll notice within the first couple of days, there's some steeper drops, but then it starts to level out. So by day 3, which would have been the next survey day after a bird was marked, 46% of birds had been removed. Between days 4 and 6, another 6.5% were removed. And between days 7 and 9, another 4.5% were removed. In total, 43% of the birds remained throughout the 9-day period. So what this tells us is that if a bird is going to be removed from the road, it's most likely going to happen within the first couple of days after death. And this makes sense because if a scavenger is going to be eating something, they're more likely to go for a freshly dead bird rather than one that's been sitting out on the road for a week. But this also tells us, though, that our surveys at 3-day intervals are most definitely underestimating and that some removal is happening between those survey days. So just keep in mind as I present the rest of the results that the numbers I'm presenting are definitely underestimates. And also this is just showing a picture here. This is at Makapu'u Lookout and just showing how there's a ton of stray cats that hang out at night, just waiting for something to eat. All right, now moving more into the results. This is just showing the total number of birds that we found each year during our surveys. And this is not taking into account any of the environmental variables or anything like that. So the orange bars are showing the first 4 years with high pressure sodium lights. The blue bars are showing the last 4 years with the LED lights. The dashed lines are the mean, and the error bars are standard deviation. Looking at these numbers alone, there's really no obvious trend that says there was way more fallout or way less fallout with the new lights. What we do see though are 2 years where fallout was pretty high compared to the rest, and that's 2012 and 2016. Now I want to show the distribution of birds per survey for each year. So again, there were 17 surveys conducted each year. So each time we went out and conducted a survey, how many birds were we finding? On some of those higher fallout years, like 2016, there were days where we found as many as 10 birds in one day, which is quite a lot. But across the board, the median value ranged from 0 to 3 birds per survey day. Now, to get into the statistical analysis, I ran generalized linear models to test the influence of our predictor variables on the number of birds that we found each year. I'm not going to bore you too much with the nitty-gritty details of the statistics, but if you do have questions and if you want to know more about that, please send me an email afterwards, and I'm more than happy to talk about that and go into some more detail. But for now, I'll just tell you what we learned from it. So these are the different predictor variables that we tested and whether they were significant or not. So when we looked at light regime, was it a high pressure sodium year or an LED year? We did not see a significant difference between the 2 time periods. However, when we look at individual years, we did see some significant effect. 2012 and 2016 were significantly different from the other years. And when you look at this, you can kind of see there's definitely a difference between these 2 years. But I'm still working on untangling the reasons as to why these years were so different from the others. Now, moonlight, we did see a significant relationship here, and this is exactly what we expected to see. The more illuminated the moon was, the less fallout we found. With wind speed, we found a significant positive relationship, which is also what we expected to find. So the stronger the winds were, the more birds we found. And then wind direction, I didn't find any significant relationship here, contrary to what some of the previous studies found. But I do think the reason for this could have to do with the fact that during this time period, there was little variation in the winds. The windward side of Oahu is dominated by the northeast trade winds, and I think there just wasn't enough variation for a good comparison here. Okay, now I want to move into some of the relationships with those significant variables. And I'm going to just take a look at the year 2012 since it was the first year of surveys and also the year with the most birds. But the trends are kind of similar for most years. So what I'm showing here is the percentage of the moon that was illuminated in relation to the number of birds we found on our different survey days. So the top of this black line, the top of the curve is showing a full moon, and the bottom of the curve is a new moon. And then each circle is a survey day and the percentage of birds that we found on that survey day. So in total, there were 60 birds found this year. So each circle is a percentage of 60. Now, what we see that's pretty characteristic of this kind of stuff is that when there's a full moon, we see this drop in fallout. So there's no birds found right during the full moon period. But then when there's a new moon, or close to a new moon, we start to see more birds falling out. And this year isn't necessarily the best example of this, but this is kind of the trend that we tend to see. And the correlation coefficient for this year was a negative 0.537, which is a moderate correlation. All right, now let's take a look at wind speed and fallout. So this time I'm showing average nightly wind speed, and that's in knots. And then instead of showing the percentage of birds, this is just the raw number of birds that we found on those survey days. So even though the correlation for this year is a little bit lower, it's only 0.336, I think there's a pretty clear trend that you can see here. So you'll notice as the wind speeds pick up, that's when we start to see a peak and fallout happening here. And then it drops a little, and then there's a little spike, and then it drops, and we see no fallout. And then as the winds pick up, we get this second peak and fallout. So I think the reason why we're seeing more fallout with these higher wind speeds has to do with the fact that birds require wind in order to fledge in the first place. So on these days where the wind speeds are really, really low, they're probably not even leaving their nests. Now, when the wind speeds get really, really strong, since this is the first time these birds are flying, they could get knocked around and end up falling down too. And I think it might be a combination of that and the fact that they're waiting for it to be windy in order to leave. Okay, now I want to take a look at where we were finding the birds along this survey route. So first I want to show a map of light density in this area. So the crosses here are showing the start and end points of our survey route. And then I'm showing light density in terms of streetlights per kilometer. So this green region is up to 38 streetlights per kilometer. The yellow is up to 58 per kilometer. The orange up to 77, and the red up to 96. So really how to interpret this is that the red and orange and yellow are the really, really bright spots. And then the green area is pretty well lit, but beyond that is where it starts to get much darker. And then, let's see, and then over here, I'm showing bird fallout density. So we plotted all of the points of where we found birds across all 8 years, and 95% of those points fit within this green region. 75% could fit within the yellow. 50% could fit just within the orange, and 25% fit just within these small little red bubbles. So what that means is that the red and orange and yellow are really the hot spots of where fallout was occurring. The green is more of the range of where we found birds. Now there were some outliers. We did find birds around the corner of Makapu'u Point here, but in general, most of the birds that we found were in this region. Now, when we look at the light density and the bird density, you'll notice there's some pretty strong overlap between the hotspot of light and the hotspot of birds. So this kind of supports the idea that these birds are being drawn towards these brightly lit areas. Now, one thing you might notice is that there's this hotspot of fallout in an area where there's not a hotspot of light. And there's a couple of reasons why this might be. So one possibility is just due to proximity. So let's see. So right here are the 2 breeding colonies, and it could be the fact that it's just so close that we see birds there. But also another reason is that Sea Life Park is right on the other side of the road here, and they do have some lights within their facility that the birds could be attracted to, and those aren't accounted for in my light map over here. Okay, so now I just want to show some pictures of what it looks like when we find these birds and where we're finding them, especially if you're not familiar with this area. I'll give you a sense of what it looks like. So sometimes we find birds directly underneath streetlights. Oops. Sometimes we find birds directly underneath streetlights, such as this one, which was definitely hit by a car, and then this one over here, which I think is the one that collided with a power line. But sometimes we find them more in the middle of the road, near gas stations or near McDonald's. This McDonald's in Waimanalo tends to be a hot spot every year. We find a lot of birds right there. I don't know, maybe it's attracted to the big arch, but for some reason that tends to be a hot spot. All right, so just to wrap up some of the conclusions from my research so far, we found no change in fallout with the LED streetlights compared to the high pressure sodium lights. This isn't the best case scenario. Of course, we would have loved to see less fallout with the new lights, but it's also not the worst case scenario if it's not making it worse, and the LED lights are more energy efficient, so that's a good thing. We did find that fallout was correlated with moon and wind speed, and one limitation to this study is uncertainty in reproductive success. We don't have great population estimates for each year. Future work still to come. I'm going to be working more on the spatial analysis, getting into analyzing those hotspots a little bit more, and I want to work with managers and the community to help reduce fallout. So if you're still with me, now we're going to get into the fun part, And I'm gonna give you a break from me talking and a chance to watch this really fun video that was made by Ilana Nims, which does a great job of explaining fallout and how people can help. So hopefully the sound and everything works on here. If it doesn't, then you can just pause this video and go to YouTube and search seabird fallout, but I think it's gonna work, so let's see. Oh, no. Oops. Okay, how do I get this? Bear with me 1 second as I navigate to the next slide. I love that video. Okay, let's see. I'm just gonna go here and start it from here. So anyways, yeah, I love that video. It's made by Ilana Nims, who's in the Pelagicos Lab also. If you want to go back and watch that again, it's Seabird Fallout, and you can just type that into YouTube and it'll come up. So I think that video does a great job of explaining how seabirds strand in the road and what you can do to help them. But I'll go a little bit more into detail about that now. So if you're driving down the road, what is it going to look like if you see a bird? So you can keep your eyes open when you're driving at night in November and December. Sometimes they'll be pretty easy to spot. They'll just be sitting on the side of the road, or if they're in the middle of the road, they'll be really easy to spot. So in general, you kind of want to drive a little bit slower during these months, especially if you're in the Waimanalo area. Sometimes they'll be easy to see, like this one. Sometimes they'll be pretty tricky to see, and they might blend in with the road or the gravel. So you can see this one here is really hard to spot. It was actually sitting directly underneath the street light here. I cropped it off a little bit, but so here's a closer view of this one. And when you get up close, you can see it's actually in front of this house that has some bright lights out front. So that may have been another reason why it was drawn to this spot in particular. Now, I was luckily able to help get this bird out of the road just minutes before a bus came through and pulled into this spot. So that is a big problem for these birds. This area, there's a lot of bus stops along this route, and the buses, of course, they can't slow down in time. So keep your eyes open as you're driving down the road during the fledging season. But so far, I've talked mostly about finding birds on or near the road, but that's not the only place where you might find them. They might end up in your yard, in your driveway, in parks, parking lots. They could really be anywhere, so keep your eyes peeled. They do tend to hide, though. So this bird was in a friend's driveway in Kailua, And you can see it looked for whatever shelter it could find, which in this case was just a little branch. This one was ironically outside of our lab at the Oceanic Institute. And it was funny because I was just working there one day and I went over to the water fountain to fill up my water bottle. And then right tucked in behind the water fountain was this little shearwater. So that was funny enough. And then
Jennifer,
yeah.
your audio is kind of getting feedback. It's kind of like echoing.
Oh no.
I don't know, like it happened right after you did the video. So I don't know.
Maybe, I wonder if
Because you're talking to the same microphone, so it's fine. But
should I try turning down like my computer volume or talking a little quieter?
yeah, because there's like every time you talk now, it's like there's like a echo.
Oh no.
But it happened right after your video. Everything was fine, and then the video. So
I wonder if I try putting in headphones. Maybe?
yeah, try put your headphone. It's fine.
Is this any better?
No, it's still echoing. Oh, I don't know.
Okay, do you want me to try maybe exiting out and trying again?
How much more slides do you have?
Just a couple.
Just a couple. I would just go through it then. It's fine.
Are you sure?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't want to mess it up and then, like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll try to talk maybe a little bit softer. Maybe it won't give as much feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, should I just continue now?
Yeah, just continue.
Okay, so another bird that we found was also at the Oceanic Institute, and this one was kind of tucked right behind the ladder and a big tank. And what you'll notice with all of these birds is that they seem to be hiding somewhere. And I think this is because they're burrow nesting birds. They're used to being in the safety of their burrow. So I think when they stranded, they were looking for some place to kind of crawl in and look for shelter. So what can you do when you find a stranded bird that needs help? Well, the video did a really great job of outlining that, but just to go through it one more time, you can use a clean towel, sheet, or t-shirt to gently grab the bird from behind. And you want to make sure you tuck its wings in the natural position. Don't force them in any unnatural way. And if you put the towel over the bird's head, that'll keep it calm and also protect your hands from getting bitten. Next, you can place the bird in a pet carrier or a cardboard box with air holes. And if you have a towel or something that you can put down in the bottom, this will make it more comfortable and help protect the bird's chest bone from bruising. And then you can transport the bird to a licensed rehab center like Sea Life Park in Waimanalo or Feather and Fur in Kailua. And this is just a picture here of the bird drop station, the bird drop station at Sea Life Park. So they have these crates here that you can place the bird in, and then just fill out a slip with where you found the bird, when you found it, and the condition that it was in. And then they'll make sure the bird is healthy enough to be released back into the wild, and when it is, then they'll release it. All right, so that's the more fun way to get involved, but another thing that you can do to help is make lighting adjustments at home, and these recommendations come from Hawaiʻi DLNR. So one thing that we don't really have control over is the streetlights, but the DLNR suggests that they should be full cutoff low pressure sodium if possible. And then things we can control on our homes, floodlights can be replaced with shielded downlights. Unshielded lanai entry lights can be replaced with these fully shielded downlights or yellow bug bulbs. And then if you have any lights that are on stairways or walkways, you can make sure that they're pointing directly onto those areas instead of out or up into the sky. And one more thing you can do that's not only good for wildlife, but good for your electricity bill too, is just to remember to turn lights off before going to bed or when you're not using them. So this is just a picture of some of the lights that are common in Hawaii. These jelly jars are pretty bad. They waste up to 50–60% of light in the form of glare. So a better alternative are canister downlights, which are shielded and much more energy efficient. And then floodlights and carriage lamps, again, are unshielded and they cause a lot of light scatter. So a better alternative to these are the downlights and bollard fixtures, which are shielded. All right, so just to wrap it all up, what we learned from this research is that fallout is occurring at about the same rate with the new LED lights as the old high-pressure sodium lights. We learned that fallout is most likely to happen on nights where the winds are very strong and there's little to no moonlight. And what you can do to get involved is be on the lookout for stranded shearwaters during their fledging season, which again is November and December of every year. And if it's something you can do, you can consider making adjustments at home to help reduce light pollution overall. And I just want to thank a couple people who have been involved with this research. First, my advisor, David Heirenbach, Keith Swindle from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Dave Field and Susan Karsten from HPU, all members of the Pelagicos Lab, especially those who were involved with helping collect this data, Oikono's Ecosystem Knowledge, Hawaii DLNR, and the Epley Foundation. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email at jurmston1@my.hpu.edu. And you can also find me on Twitter at Jennifer Urmston. If you want to learn more about seabirds, you can check out oahuseabirdgroup.org. And I just want to say thanks again for tuning in, even though we couldn't be at Hanama Bay today. I'm so glad that I was able to share my research with you via this virtual Zoom talk. And thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for having me.